Imagine this. You're on a dream vacation with your family. The sun is shining. The kids are laughing, and for once, life feels perfect. But in a single moment, flashing police lights appear behind you, and everything changes. What was supposed to be a peaceful trip turns into a nightmare of racial profiling, abuse of power, and fear. But here's the twist the officers never saw coming. The man they humiliated wasn't just any father. He was a federal FBI agent. And what happened next would shake the entire nation. It was supposed to be perfect. A week away from work, away from school, away from all the stress of their busy lives. The Johnson family had planned this trip for months. Mark Johnson, a man in his early 40s with a calm voice and an easy smile, wanted nothing more than to give his family a break. His wife, Lisa, had been balancing her job as a teacher and running their household, and their 2 kids, 12-year-old Michael and 8-year-old Jasmine, were thrilled for the adventure. The plan was simple: sunshine, laughter, boardwalk food, and long walks by the ocean. They had rented a cozy beach house in a small coastal town, known for its quaint shops, family-friendly boardwalk, and wide-open skies that turned pink and gold at sunset. It was the kind of place people went to escape the real world, to relax, to breathe. Mark worked in law enforcement, a fact most people wouldn't guess if they met him at a barbecue or on a fishing pier. He was soft-spoken, more comfortable listening than talking. His kids only knew him as Dad, the man who made pancakes on Saturdays and sang old Motown songs in the car, slightly off-key. To them, he wasn't an officer. He wasn't someone with authority. He was the safe place in their world. And so, the Johnsons packed up their SUV, filled it with snacks, beach gear, and Jasmine's favorite stuffed teddy, and hit the road. The drive into town was peaceful at first. Rolling green fields gave way to clusters of shops, diners, and little houses with white fences. Lisa pointed out a candy store to Jasmine, who pressed her face against the window with excitement. Michael, on the other hand, was already dreaming of the arcade on the boardwalk. But as they drove deeper into town, something felt off. The look started small. A couple sitting on a porch turned their heads as the Johnsons' car rolled by. A man filling up his truck at a gas station stopped mid-pump and stared. A group of teenagers whispered to each other as they walked past the rental office where the Johnsons picked up their house keys. At first, Lisa brushed it off. "Small towns," she muttered under her breath. "They probably just don't see a lot of new people." But Mark noticed more than his wife did. His years in law enforcement had sharpened his instincts. These weren't just curious glances. They weren't the normal looks tourists get when visiting somewhere new. No, these stares carried something heavier: judgment, suspicion, and something Mark knew all too well: prejudice. He didn't say anything, though. His priority was his family's happiness. "We're here to relax," he reminded himself. "Don't let this ruin it." The Johnsons spent their first evening trying to soak in the joy of vacation. They walked along the beach, toes sinking into the cool sand as waves crashed at their feet. Michael raced Jasmine down the shoreline, laughing, while Lisa snapped photos on her phone. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect, exactly as they had dreamed. They stopped at a local diner for dinner. The food smelled incredible: fried fish, homemade biscuits, and peach cobbler for dessert. But the mood soured when the family walked in. The chatter in the diner dimmed. People turned their heads. Conversation slowed. It was as though the entire room shifted focus to the Johnsons. Lisa whispered, "Mark, do you feel that?" He nodded, but again he tried to keep calm. "Let's just enjoy our meal," he said softly. The waitress, a young woman with nervous eyes, avoided looking at them directly as she took their order. The kids noticed too. "Why is everyone staring at us?" Michael asked, his voice low. Lisa forced a smile. "Because you're so handsome, that's why," she said quickly, trying to shield him from the truth. But inside, her stomach churned. Despite the uneasy atmosphere, they ate, tipped generously, and left with forced smiles. On the way back to their rental, Mark squeezed Lisa's hand. Neither said it out loud, but both knew something wasn't right about this town. The next morning, Mark went for an early jog around the neighborhood. He liked to clear his head that way, to watch the sunrise and breathe in the salty air. But during that jog, he noticed the way people reacted to him. A man walking his dog crossed the street rather than pass him. Two women on a porch stopped talking as he ran by, their eyes following him until he disappeared around the corner. When he returned, Lisa was making coffee. "How was the run?" she asked casually. Mark hesitated. "Quiet. Too quiet." He didn't want to scare her, but he couldn't ignore the tension building around them. Later that day, as the family loaded up the car to drive to the boardwalk, a police cruiser rolled slowly past their rental house. The officer inside stared hard at Mark before driving away. Mark's chest tightened. That was no casual glance. That was surveillance. Still, he kept it to himself. Don't overreact, he thought. The kids deserve a good time. At the boardwalk, things improved a little. The sounds of laughter, music, and carnival games drowned out the tension. Jasmine rode the carousel 3 times in a row. Michael played skee-ball and proudly carried a small stuffed prize back to car. For a few hours, the Johnsons almost forgot the stares, the whispers, and the uneasy sense of being watched. But reality has a way of catching up. On their way back from the boardwalk, another police car appeared in their rearview mirror. It didn't pull them over. It just followed them for several blocks before turning off down another street. Lisa finally said what they were both thinking. "Mark, do you think they're targeting us?" He exhaled slowly, choosing his words carefully. "I think we need to be careful. That's all." The kids were in the back seat, half asleep, so he didn't explain further. But deep down, Mark knew exactly what was happening. This town had a problem, and that problem had just put its eyes on his family. That night, after the kids went to bed, Mark stood by the window of their rental, staring out at the quiet street. His instincts screamed at him. Something wasn't right. Lisa joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. Mark didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "I've dealt with men like this before. They're not curious. They're not cautious. They're waiting for an excuse." Lisa shivered. An excuse for what? Mark looked out into the darkness, his jaw tight. "To remind us we don't belong." The Johnsons didn't know it yet, but within 24 hours, Mark's fears would come true. Their peaceful family vacation was about to turn into a nightmare, one that would not only test their strength, but also expose a dark secret buried within the very police force sworn to protect that town. The morning started out normal, almost too normal. The Johnson family woke up to the smell of bacon sizzling in the little rental house kitchen. Lisa was humming as she poured orange juice. Jasmine was still in her pajamas clutching her teddy bear, and Michael was pestering his dad about going fishing later that day. "Let's take a drive first," Mark suggested, sipping his coffee. "We'll check out the scenic route by the cliffs." Heard the views amazing. The kids cheered. They loved little adventures. It felt like vacation was finally starting to smooth out, the tension from the night before fading away. After breakfast, they piled into the SUV. Lisa packed water bottles, chips, and fruit snacks for the road. They made a quick stop at a gas station on the edge of town, the kind with squeaky pumps and faded posters in the windows. Michael begged for beef jerky. Jasmine picked a pack of gummy worms, and Lisa grabbed a coffee to go. It was supposed to be an easy, carefree ride back. But before they even reached the rental house, trouble came flashing in the rearview mirror. Red and blue, spinning, glaring. Lisa's eyes widened. "Mark, are they pulling us over?" Mark glanced in the mirror. A patrol car was right behind them, lights blazing, siren chirping for a brief second before cutting off. He carefully signaled and pulled the SUV onto the shoulder of the road. In the back seat, Jasmine clutched her teddy tighter. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" Mark forced his voice to sound calm. "No, sweetie, everything's fine." But inside, his stomach dropped. He hadn't been speeding. He hadn't run a light. There was no reason for this. And yet, here they were. 2 officers got out of the cruiser, both white, both with stern expressions. Their hands hovered near their holsters, as if they were approaching a dangerous criminal rather than a family if we're on vacation. Mark rolled down his window, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. His law enforcement training kicked in immediately. Don't make sudden movements, stay calm, don't escalate. But the officers didn't even bother with a greeting. "Step out of the vehicle. Now." One of them barked, voice sharp like a whip. Mark blinked. "Excuse me, officer, may I ask why I'm being pulled over?" His voice was steady, respectful, but firm. The officer's jaw tightened. "Out. Now." Lisa's heart was pounding. She leaned forward slightly, her voice shaking but polite. "Officer, is there a reason for the stop?" That question seemed to ignite something ugly. One officer yanked open the driver's door without warning. He grabbed Mark's arm and pulled him out roughly. The children screamed. Jasmine's teddy bear slipped to the floor as she cried, "Daddy!" Mark was shoved against the SUV, his chest hitting the metal with a dull thud. One officer wrenched his arms behind his back and slapped on the cuffs. Lisa gasped, "Wait, he hasn't done anything. Please." But before she could finish, the other officer snapped, "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Lisa tried to keep her voice steady. "My children are inside. Can you please?" The officer cut her off, voice raised now. "Out. Now." Tears pricked at Lisa's eyes as she opened her door slowly, her hands raised. She glanced back at her kids. "It's okay, babies. Stay calm. Mommy's right here." But the officer didn't give her time to reassure them. He grabbed her arm and shoved her against the side of the SUV. The kids sobbed louder, pounding on the windows. "Stop. Don't hurt Mommy." Michael shouted from the back seat. The officers ignored them. Mark tried to keep his voice level, though anger boiled inside him. "Officers, you're making a mistake. I haven't done anything wrong." One officer sneered. "You were driving a suspicious vehicle." Mark frowned. "Suspicious? We're in a rental. We just stopped at a gas station. That's hardly." The officer slammed him harder against the hood, cutting him off. "Don't talk back. You're under investigation." Lisa's voice cracked as she pleaded, "Please, our children are watching. Can you at least explain?" But the answer was only hostility. The officer closest to her growled, "You people don't get to ask questions." Those words hit harder than any shove. "You people." It was deliberate. A message. Inside the SUV, Jasmine's sobs shook her tiny body. She buried her face in Michael's arm. "Why are they taking Daddy?" she cried. Michael, though only 12, tried to be strong for his sister. He held her close, whispering, "It's going to be okay. Dad's tough. He's not scared." But truthfully, Michael was terrified. He had never seen his father, the strongest person he knew, treated like a criminal. The commotion caught attention. A couple of cars slowed down. A man on a bicycle stopped across the street, pulling out his phone to record. One bystander called out, "Hey, what did they even do?" The officers ignored him. Another voice shouted, "That's a family, man. You can't just treat them like that." Still, no explanation came. As Mark stood there, pressed against the SUV, his mind raced. Years of training had taught him how quickly these situations would spiral. One wrong move, one sharp word, and things could turn deadly. He wanted to fight back, to shout, to demand justice. But his kids were watching. His wife was being manhandled. He had to stay in control, no matter how humiliating this was. "Stay calm," he reminded himself silently. "Don't give them what they want." From the car, Michael shouted again, "Let him go." He didn't do anything. The officer turned his head, glaring at the boy through the glass. "Quiet down, kid." Lisa's heart broke. Her babies were seeing everything. Every shove, every cruel word, every injustice. She couldn't shield them from it. What started as a peaceful morning drive had spiraled into a nightmare. Within minutes, a law-abiding family had been reduced to suspects, not because of anything they did, but because of who they were. The Johnsons' children were left crying in the back seat. Lisa was restrained against the SUV, her voice shaking as she tried to soothe them. And Mark, calm, strong, protective Mark, was humiliated, cuffed like a criminal, accused of driving a suspicious vehicle. But deep down, Mark knew this wasn't about a vehicle. This was about race. And what the officers didn't know, what would soon turn this entire situation upside down, was that the man they were treating like a criminal wasn't just any father on vacation. He was a federal agent. And that truth was about to change everything. The air was thick with tension, almost suffocating. The flashing red and blue lights painted the Johnson family's SUV in a sickening glow, like a stage for humiliation. The officers weren't just making an arrest. They were making a statement. Their body language screamed arrogance, their movements fueled not by law but by something darker. One officer leaned in close to Mark's ear, his voice low but sharp. "People like you don't belong here." The words stung, not because they were unfamiliar, but because they were delivered with such confidence, as if backed by the authority of the badge. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This wasn't about a broken law or a suspicious vehicle. This was about race. By now, the scene had drawn a small crowd. Cars slowed down, drivers rolling down their windows to see what was happening. A couple of teenagers stood on the sidewalk, phones held high, recording every second. A woman in a sundress called out, her voice trembling with anger. "Why are you treating them like criminals? There are kids in that car." Another man shouted from across the street, "You can't just arrest people for no reason. What did they even do?" But the officers didn't flinch. They ignored the questions, ignored the cameras, ignored the voices of reason. Their focus remained locked on Mark and Lisa, their chosen targets. Inside the SUV, Michael pressed his face against a window, fists clenched. He wanted to scream, to run out and defend his parents, but fear held him frozen in place. Jasmine sobbed uncontrollably, her tiny body trembling. "Why are they hurting Daddy?" she wailed, clutching her teddy so tightly it seemed strained. Michael tried to comfort her, though his own voice shook. "It's okay, Jazzy. Dad's strong. He's going to be okay. I promise." But deep inside, Michael wasn't sure. He had never seen his father, his hero, look so powerless. Outside, Mark's mind was at war. Years of law enforcement training told him exactly what to do. Stay calm, don't resist, don't give them a reason to escalate. He knew every move was being watched, recorded not only by bystanders but also by the officers' own body cams. And yet, he was human. Rage boiled inside him. Every shove, every hateful word, every terrified cry from his children was a spark, threatening to ignite into an explosion. But he couldn't afford that. Not here. Not now. He closed his eyes briefly, drawing in a slow breath. When he opened them again, his voice was steady. "Sir," he said firmly but respectfully, "I think you should check your information. You're making a big mistake." The officers looked at each other and laughed. One of them shook his head as if Mark had just told the funniest joke of the year. "A mistake?" the officer sneered. "The only mistake here is you thinking you have a say." He pushed Mark harder against the hood, the metal burning hot under the midday sun. Lisa cried out, "Stop. Please, you're hurting him." But her plea was met with nothing but cold eyes. The second officer circled the SUV like a predator stalking prey. He peered into the back seat where Michael and Jasmine sat crying. "Quiet those kids down," he barked at Lisa, "or we'll find a place for them too." Lisa's heart stopped. "They're children. Please don't threaten them." But the officer just smirked, enjoying the power. The bystanders grew louder, their voices clashing with the officer's commands. "Let him go," one man yelled. "This is harassment," shouted another. "You can't treat people like this in broad daylight." Phones were everywhere now, recording from every angle. Some people whispered nervously, afraid of retaliation, while others openly confronted the officers. Still, the officers pressed on, convinced their badges gave them untouchable authority. Lisa's knees trembled as she stood restrained beside the SUV. Tears streaked down her face, but her voice carried a strength born out of pure desperation. "My children are watching this. You're traumatizing them. Whatever you think we did, we didn't. We're just a family on vacation." Her words were raw, almost pleading, but the officers didn't care. To them, her voice was just noise. One officer leaned close, his voice dripping with venom. "Maybe next time, you'll think twice before coming where you don't belong." Lisa's stomach turned. It wasn't just racism, it was intimidation, meant to break them down, to make them small. Through it all, Mark refused to break. He kept his posture steady, his breathing controlled. He knew that losing control could cost him everything, his family's safety, his dignity. maybe even his life. But he also knew something the officers didn't. They weren't dealing with an ordinary man. He repeated calmly, though his wrists ached from the cuffs digging into his skin. "You're making a mistake. A big one." The officers chuckled again, dismissing him like an insect beneath their boots. To them, Mark Johnson was just another black man they could push around, humiliate, and silence. They had no idea who they were dealing with. In that moment, Mark made a silent promise to himself and to his family. He promised Michael and Jasmine that he would protect them no matter the cost. He promised Lisa that her tears wouldn't be in vain. And he promised himself that when this was over, justice would be served, not just for his family, but for everyone who had suffered under the weight of abuse and prejudice like this. For now, though, he had to endure. He had to play the part they forced on him, the part of the powerless man. Because soon, very soon, the truth would come out. And when it did, the balance of power would shift in a way these officers never saw coming. The scene stretched on painfully, every second heavy with humiliation. The officers tightened their grip, barked orders, and ignored the outcry around them. They believed they owned this moment, that their power was absolute. But the crowd knew the truth. The bystanders' recordings captured every insult, every shove, every racist undertone. And Mark carried the truth within him, hidden like a loaded weapon. They thought they were in control. They thought their badges made them untouchable. But power built on hate is fragile, and it was about to crack. The humiliation had dragged on for nearly an hour. An hour of Mark pressed against the hood of the SUV, his wrists raw from the cuffs digging into his skin. An hour of Lisa pleading with the officers, her voice hoarse from crying. An hour of Michael and Jasmine trapped in the back seat, their faces pressed against the glass, watching their parents be treated like criminals. The officers weren't slowing down. In fact, their confidence seemed to grow with every passing minute. One finally muttered, "We're taking him down to the station. Let's see what he has to say there." The words hit Lisa like a punch. "The station?" she gasped. "You can't. He hasn't done anything." The officer shot her a cold glare. "Ma'am, don't make this harder on yourself. You'll be coming too." Jasmine began to sob uncontrollably, pounding her little fists against the window. "Don't take Daddy. Please don't take him." Michael wrapped his arms around her, whispering, "It's going to be okay, Jazzy. I promise." But his own voice cracked. He wasn't sure it would be okay. Mark's mind raced. He knew that if they got him inside that station, things could spiral out of control. Records could be manipulated. Stories could be fabricated. His family could be in even more danger. It was time. Mark straightened his posture as much as the cuffs would allow. His breathing slowed, his eyes narrowed, and for the first time since the ordeal began, his voice carried the weight of authority. "You should probably call your chief before you process me," he said evenly. The officer scoffed. "Yeah? And why is that?" One asked, mocking him. Mark looked him dead in the eye, his tone sharp as steel. "My name is Special Agent Mark Johnson, FBI." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The crowd, who had been shouting moments before, went dead silent. Even the children stopped crying, confused by their father's sudden shift in tone. The officers froze. Their smirks evaporated. One's face drained of color. The other stammered. "Why, you're FBI?" Mark didn't blink. He didn't waver. His eyes locked on theirs with an intensity that made them shift uncomfortably. "Badge number 4772. Call your chief. Now." For the first time that day, the officers looked uncertain. Their hands twitched nervously, their confidence cracking like glass. We need to verify this," one muttered, fumbling for his radio. The other officer whispered something under his breath, but the crowd heard it. "We're screwed." Murmurs rippled through the bystanders. Phones tilted closer, capturing every second. People exchanged shocked glances. This wasn't just a family on vacation. This wasn't just another wrongful stop. This was a federal agent being targeted because of the color of his skin. And the whole world was watching. It didn't take long. Within minutes, another police vehicle screeched to a halt at the scene. The crowd parted as the town's police chief stepped out, his face pale, his movements hurried. He rushed over to Mark, his voice shaking. "Agent Johnson?" Mark gave a slow nod. The chief spun on his officers, his voice exploding. "What the hell have you done?" The two officers stammered, pointing fingers, scrambling for excuses. He didn't identify himself. "We thought—" He was acting suspicious. "Suspicious?" the chief barked. "You handcuffed a federal agent in front of his wife and kids, in front of half the town?" The chief's face turned red with rage. He gestured sharply. "Get those cuffs off him. Now!" The metal clinked as the cuffs were removed from Mark's wrists. He rubbed his sore skin, his face calm, but his eyes blazing with restrained fury. Lisa rushed to his side, wrapping her arms around him as tears streamed down her face. "Oh my God, Mark!" Michael and Jasmine burst out of the SUV, running straight into their father's arms. Jasmine sobbed into his chest. "Daddy, I thought they were going to take you away." Mark knelt, hugging them tightly. "I'm here, baby. I'm not going anywhere." The crowd erupted with shouts. Some cheered at the revelation. Others cursed at the officers. Cameras zoomed in closer. What had started as a small-town traffic stop had become a national scandal in the making. The chief turned back to the Johnsons, his voice dripping with desperation. "Agent Johnson, I am so sorry. This should never have happened. I assure you, this department will handle this immediately." But his apologies fell flat. The damage was done. The humiliation, the trauma, the blatant racism, all of it was carved into the memory of every witness, and especially into the hearts of two children who had just seen their parents treated like criminals. Mark's voice was cold, steady, unforgiving. "You'll have plenty of time to explain yourself, to the Bureau, and to the public." The chief swallowed hard, realizing just how far this disaster would reach. The two arresting officers stood frozen, their faces ghostly pale. Their arrogance was gone, replaced with raw fear. One muttered, We didn't know." Mark turned his gaze on them, his voice sharp. "That's the problem. You didn't care to know. You saw my skin before you saw me." Neither officer had an answer. Their silence said everything. By now, the crowd was buzzing with energy. Dozens of phones had captured the entire ordeal. From the moment Mark was pulled out of his car to the exact second he revealed who he was. "Man, this is going to blow up online," one teenager whispered, holding his phone high. Another woman nodded firmly. "Good. People need to see this. They need to see what happens every day, just not usually to someone with power." Mark overheard and his chest tightened. She was right. If he hadn't been FBI, the outcome might have been very different. Deadly, even. Though the cuffs were gone, the scars remained. Michael clung to his father's arm, refusing to let go. Jasmine wouldn't stop crying, even as Lisa tried to soothe her. Lisa's voice was shaky but determined. "Mark! They don't get to just walk away from this. They traumatized our kids. They humiliated us. They have to answer for it." Mark nodded slowly. "Oh, they will." He looked around at the cameras, the witnesses, the officers standing in shame. He knew the story wouldn't end here. In fact, it was only beginning. As the chief escorted the family back toward their SUV, trying in vain to smooth things over, the bystanders' recordings were already uploading to social media. The world was about to see everything. The humiliation, the abuse, the racism hiding behind badges. For the Johnson family, the vacation was over, but their story, one born from pain and injustice, was about to spark a conversation far bigger than this small town could ever contain. And though Mark's title had saved him in the end, the truth burned in his heart. It should never have come to this. News travels fast in the digital age. Sometimes it takes days, sometimes hours. But in this case, it took only minutes. By the time the Johnson family returned to their rental house, shaken and exhausted, videos of the incident were already exploding across social media platforms. Clips from bystanders, Mark being shoved against the SUV, Lisa being restrained, Jasmine sobbing in the back seat, flooded timelines and feeds. The outrage was immediate. People from every corner of the country weighed in. Civil rights activists shared the footage. Journalists requested interviews. Ordinary citizens posted messages of solidarity. Within 24 hours, the story had gone viral. On talk shows, anchors shook their heads in disbelief. On podcasts, experts debated how racism continued to infect law enforcement. Celebrities tweeted their support for the Johnsons, amplifying the story even more. What had started as a small-town traffic stop had become a national conversation. People weren't just furious that officers had abused their power. They were horrified that two young children had to witness their parents being treated like criminals. Parents across the country posted their own fears. This could have been my family. For many, the story confirmed what they already knew, that racism wasn't just history, it was alive, wearing a badge, carrying a gun, and hiding behind authority. The pressure was too great to ignore. Local authorities scrambled into damage control. The two officers involved were placed on administrative leave, though many demanded they be fired outright. The police chief, who had tried to smooth things over at the scene, now faced reporters demanding answers. But it didn't stop there, because Mark wasn't just any man. He was a federal agent. The FBI launched its own internal review, and suddenly this wasn't just a local scandal. It was a national embarrassment. Statements were issued, promises were made, investigations were announced. For once, accountability didn't feel like a distant dream. It felt possible. A few days later, Mark stood at a podium in front of flashing cameras and reporters. He wore a suit, but his face carried the weight of what had happened. He wasn't there as an FBI agent giving an official statement. He was there as a father, a husband, a black man in America. His voice was steady, but behind it was raw emotion. "My job is to protect the law," he began. "But today I was reminded that justice doesn't always protect everyone equally. My children saw me humiliated in front of them, not because I broke the law, but because of who I am. That cannot continue in America." The room was silent. Reporters scribbled notes furiously. Cameras zoomed in, and across the country, people listened. Mark's words struck a chord. They weren't just about his family. They were about the countless families who never had the protection of a federal badge to shield them when things went too far. His story became a symbol of the larger fight against racism and abuse of power. Commentators said, "If this can happen to an FBI agent, imagine what happens to ordinary black men every day." Activists used the case to push for reforms in police departments across the country. Lawsuits were filed. Policy discussions reignited. The Johnson story had become a spark, one that lit fires in communities nationwide. But perhaps the most powerful part wasn't what the world saw on their screens. It was what happened behind closed doors, in the quiet moments after the chaos. Michael and Jasmine, though shaken, clung to their father not with fear, but with pride. "Daddy," Michael said one night as they sat together on the couch, "I was scared, but you didn't yell. You didn't fight. You stayed strong. I want to be like you." Jasmine, her teddy bear back in her arms, nodded through her tears. "Me too, Daddy. You're brave." Mark hugged them tightly, his heart swelling. To them, he wasn't just a federal agent or a victim of injustice. He was their hero, not because of his badge, but because of his dignity and courage in the face of hate. The Johnsons eventually left that small coastal town, their dream vacation ruined. They returned home with memories they never wanted, memories of flashing lights, cruel words, and cold steel cuffs. Those scars would linger. Jasmine would flinch at the sight of police cars for months afterward. Michael would struggle with anger, wondering why the people sworn to protect had tried to hurt the people he loved most. Lisa would replay the scene in her mind, over and over, wishing she could have shielded her children from it all. And Mark, though proud of his composure, carried the weight of knowing his family had seen him stripped of his dignity. But those scars also carried lessons. Lessons about resilience, about truth, about the fight for justice that must continue. In the end, the Johnson story wasn't just about one family's nightmare. It was about America's reality. It was a reminder that racism can wear a badge. That abuse of power doesn't always come in the form of a shadowy villain. It can come from the very people sworn to serve and protect. But it was also a reminder of something else. Truth and justice can still shine through. Because when bystanders refused to look away, when people pulled out their phones, When voices rose together, abuse was exposed. And when Mark stood up, not just as an FBI agent, but as a father, he proved that dignity can't be stolen, even in the darkest moments. The Johnsons went home from that vacation with scars they never asked for, but they also went home with a story that inspired millions, a story that reminded people across the country that silence is dangerous and speaking out is powerful. Mark's children, though young, learned a lesson far deeper than anything taught in school. Courage isn't about fighting with fists, it's about standing strong with truth, even when the world tries to break you down. And that story, the story of a black family on vacation, humiliated by prejudice, but lifted by truth, will live on. Because while racism may hide behind authority, truth has a way of exposing it, and justice, once awakened, cannot be silenced.